Okay. So let's start with a very, very short introduction to the website. Welcome, everyone. This is a webinar organized by the Uncomfortable Knowledge Hub. This hub has been developed within a European project called MAGIC. And the original goal was to check the quality of the narratives that are used to support different policies within different domains. And then during our project, we realized that there is what has been called the accumulation of uncomfortable knowledge. That, I mean, there are things that are not consistent with the story told within the various policy, and then this knowledge is accumulated because nobody wants to discuss about the fact that there are some problems or some conceptual difficulties in the way the policy are justified and are implemented. So we decided to put together all this finding in this website. So for those that are new to this website, I just flagging you that there is a section here, a topics section, which we present examples of uncomfortable knowledge in relation to different topics, the CAP, the political, the agricultural policy, the decarbonization of electricity, decarbonization of liquid fuels, the problem with the logic of the circular economy, the energy efficiency, and more in general, the problem, the complexity is entitling for scientific advice. So for each of these topics, you can find cartoons, a 90-second animated video, a few videos for 10 or 15 minutes, and scientific papers. So if those interested can go there. In relation to the webinar that where you are at the moment in, these webinars are about, in general, the simplification, the implication of an excessive simplification that is done by the attempt of using quantitative methods or mathematical inferential system to make inference about what should be done, a better thing to do, or describing, ranking, or different type of knowledge claim they are used in decision making. The last webinar was about energy models, the weakness of energy models, and then this is more about weakness of economic models, and more in general about the hubris, the claim, the Cartesian dream that we can control nature, we can identify what is the best thing to do by using quantitative analysis. For this, we have two old friends, let's say, samurai in the resistance, in the fight against the dark arts, and then in order of age, let's say, Erik Reinert, that is a guru of heterodox economics. He has a fantastic book, and he is really a person that knows, in the sense that is into economics from real understanding. As a matter of fact, he was a successful entrepreneur. He knows a lot about economics in theory, but also in practice. So he has a gut feeling of what he's talking about. And this is very rare for economists. And Andrea is another guru of sensitivity analysis, is about the fact that numbers and quantifications are very useful, are very important, but it is very tricky in the sense you must be, first of all, knows a lot about, because statistics is almost always abused. People use statistics because now there are packaged. So everyone believes that you connect data randomly and then you put this data in and you can make whatever inference. It doesn't work this way. But more Andrea has been into the implication of this mismatch between what is claimed you can do with quantitative analysis and what you actually do. So this would be, I believe, a very interesting webinar. This will be organized in this way. Andrea will start in general with the problem with science and the Cartesian dream, and then Erik will follow with the more related to the economic part, the Ricardian dream legacy. I will ask you to ask questions using the chat. We will keep track of the questions that we receive, comments, of course, and then at the end, we will have a discussion. So approximately, we are talking about 20-25 minutes for Andrea, 25 minutes for Erik, and then we go in a general discussion. If there are no options and if there are no particular questions from the audience, I will yield my the screen to Andrea, and then we can start. Okay.
Okay. Welcome everyone, and thanks for being here with us today. Let's start the operation of sharing the screen. It's always dangerous, but let's see what happened today. Okay, we seem to be there. I move this, I minimize that, I go to full screen here, not yet, and here. Okay, so we seem to be there. So this is the title of the talk, Altered States. Those who are old like me, we remember that Altered State was a very successful movie with William Hurt about people, you know, being suspended in a floating tank where they have dreams. And the dreams we talk about are very powerful dreams. We call them Cartesian and Ricardian dreams. And are dreams which shape what sociologists call, if you wish, imaginaries. There is also the expression socio-technical imaginaries to specify that those are imaginaries of the future where science and technology play an important part. I guess this talk will be put on the website of Mario, but you can also find it on my own website. So if you see papers you want to copy or to read, you can go there and capture the title of the paper from my talk without need to scribble it down. And this talk of today comes from a paper where both Erik and I were involved, together with Monica Di Fiore from the Italian CNR and Jerry Ravets, who is a famous philosopher of science, is the oldest among us all, but still very active in Oxford. So as you heard, Erik will be talking about the mathematization and excesses of theory in economics. So I will not be talking about Wolfgang or Erik or Paul Romer here, because this is what I guess Erik will be doing. But here, if you're interested, there are other papers you can give a look, because those are the best I found on the topic of the mathematization of economics. But I'm not talking about economics, I'm talking about the Cartesian dream. But I would like really to link the Cartesian dream, which is a dream of man as possessor and master of nature, to an aspect of something which has been called a procedural utopia. So the idea that you can use geometry, mathematics, algorithm, geometry to achieve social harmony based on calculus, in a sense. And I will, though this may sound strange to you, I'll try to make a case of how this dream came into being and was quite a powerful dream. Okay, so this dream has several actors, very, very many. I only list a few here. Francis Bacon, so the dream could be called the Baconian dream, but Francis Bacon is one of the most powerful author here, because he wrote a science fiction novel back in 1620 something. It was published in 1627, 1 year after his death. And in his science fiction story, he talks about the future of science, and we will see what he says. Then we have, of course, Descartes, the one of the scientific the discourse on the method. And finally, we have Condorcet, Nicole de Condorcet, which is a bit somewhat later, He died in 1794 in rather obscure circumstances during the French Revolution, because we see that Condorcet gives to all the story a particular twist. Okay, we start with this page, which you cannot read, and this is a page from the novel, The New Atlantis, where a philosopher, so to speak, tells to the narrator what are the achievements which science will bring. Now, this is a very long list. I mean, prolongation of life, curing of disease, altering of complexion. I don't read you the entire list. I only want you to believe that everything which is on this list has been accomplished. So we have here a man speaking in 1626, describing to us a number of things which we today give for granted. So, I mean, this is really a powerful prediction. We discussed with colleagues if there is anything on this list which we did not achieve. Maybe there is an item is transmission of smell through the air, which we didn't achieve. You cannot have the smell from your TV set. And perhaps we didn't achieve natural divination, understood as a way of predicting the future based on natural law. Though we can achieve a certain degree of prediction. But I mean, you know, this list was incredibly and completely achieved. So we now leave the good Francis Bacon and move to René Descartes, who wrote this discourse on the method. And in this, he's quite aggressive, quite negative about humanities, though he studied many years with the Jesuit, and he studied, I guess, Greek and Latin and philosophy. He says that this, you know, this disposition of ancient moralists have built a very big palace on foundation of sand and mud. So he rejects all this kind of knowledge he was given when he was a boy, and he exalts what? Mathematics, a kind of knowledge which possesses a higher level of knowledge. No, so instead of this speculative philosophy, which is not very useful, we can discover a practical philosophy. You remember that at that time you did not have the scientists. Now the expression of scientists is very recent. There were natural philosophers. So this is someone describing, you know, what the natural philosopher would do, as opposed to the ancient philosopher. So the natural philosopher will discover a practical knowledge by which we will know how fire, water, air, stars, and heaven act. And so we might apply those knowledge and those forces for our own end. And in this way, and this is the most famous expression, you know, the most famous word uttered by Descartes, and thus we can render ourselves the lords and possessor of nature. I myself, for the women listening, that in all these descriptions, especially in those of Bacon, nature is always a woman, and she has to be taken even with violence if needed. It's incredibly aggressive, the style and the language of those philosophers when it comes to this aspect of dominating nature. Of course, today this would be, you know, they wouldn't get away with that. Now we move to something, you know, closer to our time, the French Revolution. And Condorcet wrote a very nice booklet, predicting also Condorcet, making a history of moral progress. So imagine yourself in some kind of Kantian setting where you have the spirit, and the spirit goes through different ages, and Condorcet describes those ages of the spirit. And then he says he has a chapter for the future spirit, the 9th epochs, where he makes some prediction, and he says, listen, I'm sure that all the mistake we made is because we have bad philosophy. Remember that science was natural philosophy. If we had good philosophy, which I might now translate for you, if we have good science, all the errors will go away, including errors in the sphere of human and social affairs. So, for example, he says, oh, we will never have overpopulation. Why don't we have overpopulation? Because we will understand that the purpose of man is not to populate the planet with more and more being. And why this? Because, and this is really the fantastic prediction of Condorcet, which is, oh, well, it didn't come true, but it's extraordinary that he makes this prediction. Progress and technical progress and ethical progress will go hand in hand. Every time I read this, I, I pause because, you know, this is so powerful in a sense and so untrue in another that really gives you something to think about. And there is also a story behind that. Why was Condorcet convinced that mathematics would solve all problems, including social problems? Because he was himself a mathematician. He was involved in decision theory, what we could call today decision theory or voting theory. Even today, we use this mathematical method for multi-criteria analysis. So you have the Condorcet method. In a kind of election contest, you may have a Condorcet winner and the Condorcet ranking procedure. So it was, I mean, it practiced what he said. So he was really developing method which, according to him, would allow people to vote correctly, to express a judgment correctly, and so on and so forth. And so he extended this to all the sphere of human action. So in a sense, for Condorcet, we can rule harmoniously our society with the power of mathematics. And so, as you have heard from the algorithms of Condorcet to the geometry of Descartes, this kind of dream always had a quantification agenda at its heart. And then this goes on through the century, and from Condorcet, we can make a big jump in time and go to, well, not so big in jump, but anyhow, it's a few years, and we go to Jeremy Bentham and to his theory of utilitarianism. Also, Bentham was convinced that we could calculate the optimum. No, so he's, if you want, he's a grandfather of cost-benefit analysis, just to say, you know, in few words. Bentham is also very well known for the idea of the panopticon, for a prison where everyone would be constantly under the watch of a warden. And in a sense, as I said before, reading the list of Bacon, the Cartesian dream was very successful. This is the point in my talk where, if I have more time, I tell you how wonderful science is even today, even at the moment of speaking. But for sake of time, I will only show you this slide. A few days ago, February, landing of Perseverance on Mars. Some of you may have heard, watched this on television live, as I did, and was really, you know, we put a probe on Mars, and you know, this gives the dimension, no, of man following on the path traced by Bacon. So we don't have to doubt that the dream was successful. We only have to look what the dream implied by way of possible dystopias. So there are many social scientists have discussed this idea of the dream. If you like this book, the book of Cosmopolis of Stephen Toulmin is very nice. It talks about the Cartesian dream has a hidden agenda of modernity. Maybe we have this agenda, but we don't know that we have it. In a sense, we use, if I want to say this in more crude word, we have science as a religion, but we are not aware that we have science as a religion, in a sense, no? And Shapin talks about invisible science. What does it mean? It means that if you look around you, I guess you are at home, well, maybe you have a plant in your room that's not man-made, but if you look around you, everything you have is man-made. So we live in a society where everything is an artifact, in a sense. And each and every one of these artifacts was made possible by science. A book, you know, with paper, how paper is made, and so on and so on. Okay, you understand what I mean. So I mentioned the idea of socio-technical imaginary already, and this is to tell you that if you want to sell many books, many copies of your book, you have to be really optimist, or maybe even techno-optimist. So this is a book by Aaron Bastani, who's in theory is a Marxist. He says we can achieve luxury communism thanks to artificial intelligence and nanotechnology. For Harari, we can build a new kind of man, a man with augmented and with possibly immortal using technology, so a new God. And then again, another two technologies highlighting the big promises of platform technologies like, you know, Twitter, Facebook, Amazon, and so on, Uber, and so on and so forth. So there is a prevailing narrative where we are doing well and we are going in the right direction. But there is also a minority view. When some people have doubts, I mentioned Jerry Raves already, and if you want, you can read on this book, which is available online because it was stolen by the Russian hacker. It is now on LibGen, but it's also on my website. If you read the preface to this book, Jerry writes something very interesting on Descartes and rediscovery of ignorance. Jerry makes the point that once upon a time, ignorance was something you learned. You learned to be ignorant, and this was a proof of wisdom. No, this is the anti-Cartesian view. No, I don't fight ignorance. I become aware of my ignorance. And then, okay, there are another minority view. There are other history, no, of scientific thought. And this is very interesting. If you like this kind of book, this gives an antidote to the vision of history of science as the fruit of the intuition of great, mostly men, showing that a big role was played by miners, midwife, and law mechanics. They knew the knowing how. They knew how to do things. And then it was by preying on the knowledge of these people that the great men of science, of the academic science, could discover the know what, the reason why this was these different aspects of nature could be conquered. So, and now, as you know, I have to talk about, in particular, abuse and misuse of quantification. And something I want to make clear is that there are very many different ways to make quantification, and the number can either be visible or invisible. But as noted by this nice social scientist, Elizabeth Popp-Berman, in fact, if you think about that hard enough, mathematical models, statistical models, algorithm, ranking, indicators, they have a lot in common. We could discuss, you know, we could have a long discussion on that, but they have a lot in common, first. Second, they are very much mixed with one another. When you do a model, there is no model independently from the data set on which it was calibrated. Algorithms require a lot of statistical work to be set up, and so on and so forth. So really, those things belong together. Here I show another paper, which this paper, of which I'm co-author, goes with an explosion of work, because there is now much more attention on what we would call the sociology of quantification. We are discovering how important quantification is for our life. So if we had more time, I would like to discuss with you all these books, which discuss statistics for medicine, Richard Harris, mathematical model for regulation, Oren Pilkey, various kind of metrics. Trust in Numbers is a famous textbook on the link between legitimacy and numbers. But I will say a few words about a few of these books. And these other books, which are also very interesting. As I said, there has been a blooming of literature on various aspects of quantification. Believe it or not, I've read these books. And each of them brings you some interesting aspects of the problem. So, for example, the number provoke reaction. The numbers provoke which number will come tomorrow. So if I develop an indicator today, there will be a legacy effect of that indicator in the indicator which will be developed tomorrow. And then the number create the environment that justify their own assumptions. This is very subtle. O'Neill is one of the most critical voice. I will say a few words about her. But the idea that once you have an algorithm, for instance, the algorithms once in existence is legitimate. By definition, it exists. So it creates the environment which justify its own assumption, though you don't know those assumptions. This is also an interesting aspect. And then there is here is Andy Stirling, another social scientist, this idea that, especially in the field in which many of you are concerned, no, sustainability, energy, food security, we make use of several kind of, tool like tools or concept like expected utility, decision theory, life cycle assessment, ecosystem services. I personally hate the expression ecosystem services, but it's very much in use. Sound scientific decision, evidence-based policy, and as noted by Stirling, there is a lot of rhetoric in the use of those expressions, because each of these expressions, each of these technique deliver numbers which appear to be very precise, but then the impression of accuracy is misplaced. Those numbers are not accurate at all. They are, in a sense, many of those numbers are totally irrelevant because based on the wrong assumptions. And then which technique you use is not a trivial question. It's not a coincidence that the lobbyists always want to use risk analysis and cost-benefit analysis rather than other kind of maybe more sociological investigation or even other methods like multi-criteria analysis, because the technique is never neutral. And you can already say what will be the result very often, but just deciding which technique you use. And this has been known for a very long time. I'm here quoting Ulrich Beck, a German sociologist who wrote about that. As I said, Katie O'Neill is a formidable thinker. She's a very practical person. She's a data scientist herself. So she's not a sociologist. She's not a philosopher, but she has apparently understood all these things which her colleagues sociologists are saying. So she's really show that these algorithms, by the way, she includes algorithms, also models and ranking. For her, they are all algorithms in a sense, and I agree 100% with her. And so she says, they are opaque, they can do damage, and they can scale up. No, an algorithm is developed maybe for a city, for doing something, and then all of a sudden is used all over the country. And what she does is, she's also an activist besides being author of books, and she participates to hackathons where they reverse engineer proprietary software to discover in this software normative bias. For instance, in the software used by the police to decide on which road or which part of the city to patrol. Or here I have another form of activism. This is a French activist in statistics, stat activism. There is a very good school of sociology of number in France. This is Pierre Bourdieu, one of the father of this school. He said that sociology must be fun. Sociology must be fun. And they have done an incredible work deconstructing existing indicators, including indicators developed by the French Statistical Office in CE. They had really fight, and they won. They won fight against the establishment, against the French Statistical Office, because of course they had good idea and the media supported them. I cannot tell you all the story, but this small book is very nice to read. And then there is this huge book. This is not small. This is a huge book written by Shoshana Zuboff about the fact that when you put together artificial intelligence algorithms and cognitive psychology, the matching of these two disciplines make it possible to influence voters, consumers, all kind of users in a sense, whose data are taken away and then are used in a sense against them. And this generates, according to her, something she calls instrumentarian power. And if you have this kind of power, so if you are Facebook or Amazon or Twitter or whatever, you have all the power of the so-called surveillance capitalism. So you see, capitalism is always changing shape. Platform capitalism, surveillance capitalism, regulatory capitalism. You will see there are many of these being used. I must say that the diagnosis formulated by Zuboff is confirmed by this other book, where they describe really the use of cognitive psychology to win the battle of idea. In this case, cognitive psychology is used to launch a generation of trolls over the general population and offer and distribute and make mainstreaming a form of socio-technical imaginary which is favorable to large corporate interest, for instance, on genetically modified organism or on many other issues, on pesticide and on many other issues. This is not an easy, story to describe, but is interesting, the coincidence between the two set of authors. Here we have another writer, and she makes the. You often hear this story now. This algorithm should be made good or transparent. I mean, how can you make an algorithm good? You think your bank would ever use an algorithm which would give money to poor people? Well, I don't think so. So the idea that you make algorithm fair is in a sense very silly, right? That's not what they are built. And so not only that, but as I said before, the algorithms create an ethic. They create their own ethics, if you want. An easy way to say this is that they modify what we perceive as good or bad, because they create their own world, and we live totally immersed in this world.
Andrea,
then some. Yeah.
Andrea, just a reminder, you are over the 23 minutes you promised, eh?
Okay, I close in 1 minute, 2 minutes. So Alain Suppiot is another lecturer. This is a jurist, and he says that what is governance by number is doing to us is substituting numbers and algorithm for law. So the law is being devoid of its power. So instead of having just law, we have a way of ruling our affair with algorithmic measure of efficiency. And so this leaves us very few other open options. That, in a sense, what Suppiot says is that we have a refeudalization of society. And this is where he described that. Okay, so I have a very few time left. This is something about my work. I work also on the statistical work, but I cannot say much of it. On mathematical modeling, we also do a lot of work on this idea that you need better ways of develop a mathematical model. And this recent article on Nature written by many people, including Erik, is also one of the authors, propose how this could be done better. So if you're interested, please give a look. And I'm now closing, I started with a paper from working paper from UCL. I close with another working paper of UCL, which is just came out, where we suggest that we should urgently need something called ethics of quantification, because for the reason given in this slide, that the numbers are very powerful, and that number 3 is important. Governing the modern state or even contesting it without numbers is impossible. So this is, for this reason, we are now really thinking about how we can do something useful in this direction of creating an ethics of quantification. Okay, I'm finished. I can leave this slide for you, but maybe now I should stop sharing, right?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm here.
So, Erik, it's your turn now. Then we will have the discussion at the end. Is okay? Okay.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. When Andrea and I started talking about the Cartesian dream, I thought that in economics, in a sense, that there was a similar dream, the Ricardian dream, and what they have in common is that they raise the level of abstraction to a level where things become meaningless. And economics, it's also very much a matter of language. In the United States, there was, to be an economist, you up until the 1950s, you needed 1 or 2 languages, and the language that was mandatory in most US universities was German. because U.S. economics, all the ones that founded the American Economics Association had studied in Germany, except one. And then you see in the economics department, they say, well, I think we'll change this requirement, the language requirement. We changed it from German to mathematics. So it was done in that with that wording that mathematics is another language. And the problem with the language of mathematics is that it gives you a different kind of understanding. If you try to understand another person expressing that in numbers and symbols, you get a very strange kind of understanding. If you try to understand your child using symbols and numbers, you don't get very far. So, but this had something to do, in my view, with the Cold War, and the Cold War did something to economics, and that's what I'll try to go through. That it was actually in somebody's interest, in a sense, that economics became what it became. That it was a demand for a certain type of economics, and that abstract economics actually satisfied that demand. I'm very much in favor of Andrea touched about it, about knowing what you don't know. Cusanus, which was a German 16th century philosopher, talked about docta ignorantia. Docta ignorantia is if you light a match in a room and just get a rough idea, and 1 second you see, and then you don't see anything anymore. We have a rough idea of what you don't know, and this is the problem of economics today. That what you don't know is really not an issue. And I claim that two kinds of economics. Pre-Cold War economics could be expressed by German philosopher Gadamer. The root of everything we can call theory is to observe things as they are. That was economics as an Erfahrungswissenschaft, as the Germans would say, a science of experience. Right? So the methodology was connecting previously unconnected facts. So if there is a financial crisis, you go back in history and say, well, what are the other financial crises and what happened then, and how is this different? And then you work on historical experience. And then we got Cold War economics, expressed in this sentence. One of the nice things about economics, that it's only way of thinking. Factual knowledge does not exist. I thought that was a remarkable statement, because I'm old enough that I was fortunate to, both in Switzerland where I studied and in the US, I studied with economists who had got their degrees from before the war. So I had some old professors who were in the top pre-Cold War economics, and then all the young professors were in the other field. So I think this is a very important tension, and it has created some crisis, and I'd like to point to these crises. That's my plan. So Joseph Schumpeter, an important economist, he says that there is a trade-off in economics. The general reader will have to make up his mind whether he wants simple answers to questions or useful ones. In this, as in other economic matters, he cannot have both. So you can either have simple and irrelevant answers, or more complicated and more relevant. And I think this is still true. So what he says is that, well, you have to come with a question, and then you go into the hierarchy of economic theory, and you find a level where you can answer that question. So if, for instance, you want to know why countries in Africa are poorer than countries in Europe, well, then you need a level of abstraction which is no longer covered or marginally covered, let's say, in Ricardian economics. So Thorstein Veblen, who was a famous US economist about 100 years ago, he says there is a taxonomy of knowledge. You can have Esoteric knowledge, prestigious but often fairly useless, arises when education has contaminated healthy instincts, factless economics. This is, I think, what you have a lot now. And then he says, then there is exoteric knowledge, useful knowledge that carries little prestige, fact and experience-based economics. And there is a reverse relationship here, that the more useless the economic theory is, the more prestige it has. Right? So if you on the ground and solving practical problems, you don't get much prestige. I had a professor in the late 70s in the US who said, well, if your task is to carry a rabbit from Boston to New York, you can put it in a car and put it on the train and drive it to New York, and you solve the problem, no prestige. But if you construct a ballistic missile, this is the 70s, and put the rabbit in the ballistic missile and shoots it up in the air so it lands in New York, well, you get the Nobel Prize, but the rabbit is dead, right? So he was saying that these very abstract theories are dangerous, and I think he has a point. And the mechanism which I'm trying to describe to you today was described by a Canadian economist, Harold Innis, but the dynamic taxonomy of knowledge, I would call it. So Innis says science, which is communicated in Latin, in this case, now Latin is mathematics, gets more and more abstract and enters into alliances with the political elites. So the theory, it's in somebody's interest that the theory is shaped the way it is. And then resistant to the ruling paradigm and the elites brings up the vernacular with those not speaking Latin, the dialects, and an overthrow may take place after a shock in the system. And then he says, Western civilization is again and again saved by knowledge that for a time only survived in the periphery. The financial crisis was a very interesting example of this, that, you know, a theory had been built that it was impossible, the market would not create financial crisis. So the laws from the 30s that prevented financial crisis in 1997, they were abolished, and then it was a big financial crisis, and there was one living person who had seen that, and he was in the periphery, and you saw that University of Missouri, Kansas City, and Levy Institute, upstate New York, were the only. That's where the idea that there could be a financial crisis, a theory of financial crisis, had survived in two small universities in the United States, and suddenly these theories came back again. And this is exactly the same thing. It's Hyman Minsky wrote, "It could happen again," and it did. But he was one of the few who saw it. And this is, Innis had said that for a long time. So it's important in itself to keep diversity in economic theory alive, because occasionally these theories which seem out of date may actually become useful again. So I'll go back to an Italian economist who wrote a book in 1613, why is it that all the gold that's mined in the world comes into cities where there are no mines? So he's referring to all the gold and silver from the New World coming into Spain and ending up in cities like Amsterdam or Venice, not where the gold was. And he has two important dichotomies. You know, a problem of economics is that it doesn't have any taxonomies. Right? On the island where I live, there are 20 species of Arctic bramble, blackberries. And I'm happy with one, but the botanists have 20. And the problem in economics is that there really are no taxonomies left. And Serra pointed to two of them, and in my presentation, I'll look at how these dichotomies explain important items today. He says financial economy and production economy, two different areas you have to distinguish. That's already from the Bible. He didn't invent that. But then he says you have to distinguish between increasing returns, where production hits an input of nature, in agriculture, in mining, in fisheries, sooner or later you run into something produced by nature, and you have less and less returns. And manufacturing has increasing returns, which is the opposite of that. So these two dichotomies were left out and of mainstream economics, but I think they can tell us important things. And one thing is we tended to see communism and capitalism as being opposite, exactly the opposite in everything. I grew up in Norway with a border to Russia, to Soviet Union. It was a scary thing. But so we didn't see that actually this German economist, Friedrich List, who was the pro-manufacturing guy, he was honored by a stamp to the left in West Germany and to the right in East Germany. So he was the only hero that East and West Germany had in common. They were in favor of manufacturing industry. So Stalin was steel and electricity, and we didn't see that because the system is so different, we didn't see that the cult of manufacturing was something they had in common, and that only disappeared with the Ricardian economics again, sometime during the Cold War. That understanding disappeared, and I say the last time this was seen was with the integration of Spain into the European Union during the 1980s, which took 10 years, and tariffs were lowered very slowly, and the automotive industry was kept alive. A lot of industries were kept alive because they still understood this. So with Maastricht 92, this understanding disappears. So this was on the blackboard in my first half year of economics. To the left, it's the real economy, production of goods and services. On the right hand, you have what Schumpeter called accounting units, Rechenpfennige. So this, to the right, it's money, and to the left is what you can buy with money, right? And in good times, if you want to build a house, you want to build a factory, in the real economy, you go to the financial economy and you get money for 20 years, for 50 years. So there's a nice symbiosis between the real economy and the financial economy. The financial economy is like a scaffolding used to build the real economy. But then this understanding disappears, and the financial economy starts making money on itself. Financialization. The financial economy grows much more than the real economy. So you get this idea of a Pac-Man approach, where you see the financial economy is eating up the real economy. Greece is a perfect example of that happening. And then you get into a parasitic relationship between the financial sector and the real sector. And you see how financial parasites and debt destroy the global economy. And I think this is where we are. This is where we are now. And continental economists tended to understand this, left or right. But English economics never made this distinction properly. So the fact that we have Anglo-American economics and we've lost the German and continental economics makes this possible, because the theories saying differently are kind of out of fashion. So I'm putting up this, which is from Paul Samuelson. He was the most famous economist during the Cold War. And this was a book I was using when I was teaching economics at Hobart at William Smith Colleges in upstate New York. And the point is that you see historical school of economics, they come down to David Ricardo there in the middle, and then you John Stuart Mill and you have Marx. So he actually made, Paul Samuelson made communism and capitalism both go back to David Ricardo. So David Ricardo was the father of communism. He was with the labor theory of value, but he was also the father of neoliberalism. So the role he plays here is very important, and the basic problem is the position where Samuelson put him. So if you look at David Ricardo, who wrote a book in 1817, you see, compare him here with the engrams with another English economist, John Stuart Mill, and his father, James Mill. He was a nobody. So actually the hero in Cold War economics was a marginal figure for the first 100 years after his book was published. So engrams are incredibly useful in this way. So you see here, David Ricardo, you see in the late 1940s, here's where he explodes. Communism has promised to each according to need and from each according to ability. Samuelson's reply, based on Ricardo, was that capitalism is even better because we'll get factor price equalization. If we just get free trade, the price of wages and of capital all over the world would tend to be equal. So this is here you see the rise with the Cold War, and here is idea of comparative advantage. He couldn't see that it was easy to have a comparative advantage in staying poor, but you see here it peaks in the 1990s. So when I wouldn't have invented this, I couldn't have invented this, but after the Cold War has won, that argument is no longer needed, so we use it less, right? So there is a demand problem here in economics, which few economists have been aware of. A few people have actually discussed it. That there is a demand for economic theories, and economists tend to produce according to demand, like everyone else. So there is the Ricardian vice, basing extremely solid conclusions on very shaky assumptions. So David Ricardo assumed that world trade was the barter of labor hours. There was no capital, it was a barter of labor hours, and these labor hours were perfectly identical. Whether you were Bill Gates or a shoeshine boy, that didn't matter. So this is, I think, what we're suffering from today, the results of this extremely, should we say, not very careful use of assumptions. And assumptions are normally not discussed. So we have, I've just to show you that this has happened before, Francis Bacon, he was talking about degenerate learning. The schoolmen, the scholastics, being shut up in the cells of monastery and colleges, knowing little history, did with no great quantity of matter spin out unto his laborious cobwebs of learning that are admirable for their fineness of thread and work, but of no substance or profit. A lot of the mathematical models, in my view, correspond to Bacon's description. They're admirable they're mathematically elegant, but there's no substance in them really. So this produced some disasters. One disaster is what happened when shock therapy was introduced to Russia. You see here is production, industrial production being cut down by 50%, agricultural production cut by 50%, real wages going down by 50%, but the value of the ruble skyrockets. So the value of the ruble skyrockets so that the oligarchs can take the money out of the country. So I presented this in Moscow at one point. It was suggested that this should go to the public prosecutor. But actually, the experts, many of them Americans who came to Russia, they introduced a shock therapy which killed the real economy. But then they saw the economy as being the stock market, and the stock market was doing fine, and everybody was making money. So this is one disaster. I understand there's some Peruvians here, and I've been working in Peru, and I didn't have it on this machine, but there's some beautiful slides showing how the deindustrialization of Peru, starting in the late 70s, actually cut wages also by about half, and wages went from being about 50% of GDP down to being like 25% of GDP over a relatively short period. So in Latin America, there's similar disasters, and in the US, this is a graph which is a few years old, but the main point is the same, that for a long time after World War II, due to the labor unions and due to the way society was organized, we had what's called the Fordist wage system. The Fordist wage system is that when productivity in manufacturing industry goes up by a certain percent, wages are being raised at the same speed, which means that the division between capital and labor stays the same over time. But then here in the mid-70s, you see these split up. Productivity started to continue to go up, and real wages flattened out. And this is what we're seeing the result of now in the US. And this is, in my view, the root of the problems in the US. And here are some other problems in former Eastern European countries. You see that to the left there, Ukraine, Montenegro, Serbia, Georgia are countries where most people are poorer than they were under communism, which is, communism was not a very productive system, but it was better to have an inefficient industry than not having any industry at all. So these problems of Eastern European countries, you will see that Belarus has been doing pretty well, but the countries that were tried to be democratic and had to listen to the World Bank had to open up for free trade. But if you were a dictator, like the dictator in Belarus, you could continue having an industrial policy. So this is, I think, something we have to come to terms with, that is that the World Bank and the IMF actually has helped to deindustrialize the world. So we had 3 cycles of economic theory: physiocracy, starting out with Keynes, dying with the French Revolution. Then you have the classical economics, Ricardo, 1817, dies peaks in the 1840s, dies in 1848 for the first time, and then slowly dies out. And now we have neoclassical economics, started with Samuelson, 1948, peaks in the 1990s and dies now. So I think I sometimes use the metaphor of ties, that the tie fashion varies from very narrow to quite wide, and if you keep your ties long enough, they get fashionable again. And it's a bit like that in economic theory. If you're just stubborn enough, you get back to the same theory, but you need more than one life to cover that. So here is the demand factor report. The corporate leaders who gather in a field outside Darien, Connecticut, where one of them claims to have seen the invisible hand of the marketplace. This is a cartoon from the New Yorker in the 90s. So I use this to illustrate the demand for these kinds of theories. And now we get to the 1848 moment, when the old order collapses because it's attacked from the political right and the political left at the same time. This is interesting in the US, right? Both Trump and Ocasio-Cortez are attacking the same theory from two different angles. So the overly abstract theories collapse, and I think this is what we're seeing now. Some of us thought that the financial crisis would be enough, but we also needed the social problems that they had in 1848. And here is what I think what we're coming into now is what I label it 1848 moment. It often happens that the universal beliefs of one age of mankind becomes to subsequent age so palpable an absurdity that the only difficulty then is to imagine how such a thing can ever have appeared credible. It looks like one of the crude fancies of childhood, instantly corrected by a word from any grown person. How could the IMF think that if you have a poor African agricultural country and open up free trade with Silicon Valley, that they would be equally rich? Do I still have a couple of minutes? Seemingly.
Yeah, a couple of minutes.
Okay, so what we see now is the collapse of free trade in the United States. And I think important message for me is that this is normal. This is what happens when the technological leader loses his leadership. It happened in Holland after the 720s. They used to be the wealthiest country in Europe. Big financial crisis in the 1720s. England, around 1910, the same thing happens. The Strange Death of Liberal England was a book title, and I think, and now we can well, liberal in the English sense, and now the same thing is happening in the US. So we have you have Donald Trump tearing down Milton Friedman's idea of freedom of trade. So I just would like to present three books to you, and all published in 1848, which kind of makes this point. They all recant on David Ricardo, and the first one, of course, is Marx and Engels' Communist Manifesto, 1848. Marx was so radical that we know he had to flee to England. And there is another German economist, Bruno Hildebrandt, who wrote Economics of the Present and the Future. And Hildebrandt was so conservative, he had to flee to Switzerland to avoid a death penalty. So he became a professor at the University of Zurich, also attacking Ricardo. And then you had the most famous John Stuart Mill Principle of Economics, and an English liberalist who recants on free trade. He introduced what he called infant industry protection. The idea is that poor countries, in order to get rich, they have to protect, like if they were infants, they need protection from competition. If not, they lose manufacturing industry. And if you look at the problems of Central America, well, Central America was industrializing from the 1950s, and they were growing 10% a year, and then they got deindustrialized. So many of the problems we see it goes back to economic structure in the countries, and I think an important problem is that economic structure is one of these abstract things that is not taken into consideration. So I think we have to go down on level of abstraction and get back to old economics. I used to say that if I had been born 100 years earlier, I would have been mainstream. So I was just born at the wrong time. That's my problem. But I think because this is cyclical, I think we're coming back. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, both of you. I think that we can go into the question. As a matter of fact, we are getting questions that are not very easy to answer. Let's start with the first question for Andrea. This is from Nicola Labanca. And he says, the most advanced approach to modeling apply nowadays to complex system thinking representation based on concept of information, feedback, emergence, and so on. In so far as this approach anyhow tend to leave out materiality and people, I think they remain dual and not necessarily heal the Cartesian cut between mind and body and ideas of control it takes with it. For example, it seems the current approach to complex system mappings and surveillance, as well as ideas of constant matching energy demand and supply at various scales, are informed by imaginaries of control, which are ultimately shaped by the Cartesian thinking, no matter whether they are possibly implemented through co-creation approach and democracy consensus or not. So I would like to know Andrea Saltelli's view on whether complex system thinking actually allows overcoming the Cartesian dream. Thank you.
It's a difficult question indeed. I love, I like
Nicola
Allen,
is
I like
diabolical.
Tainter. I
Nicola is
like Allen, I
diabolical.
like Tainter, I like those thinkers, and I think yes, they very often they work in the right direction. They often, I mean, we have shared Mario a few days ago an article of Tainter and Allen on what do you need to do if you want to do intelligent for energy forecasting. So how you have to broaden the space of the possible narrative to the extent that complexity thinking forces you to open the box and open the space of the assumption to alternatives. I think those are steps in the right direction, because I mean, I've been a modelist for a long time, and what I see wrong with mathematical modeling is that very often the space of the assumption is incredibly narrow to a few sets, which is more or less compatible with the mission given to the modelers. And so if we can instead say, no, come on, there is much more which you can assume, even in alternative to what you have done so far. I think this is a step in the right direction. You mentioned the word co-production. I know that everyone is happy about that. We all should co-produce. I also, I mean, I've been, having my share of work with post-normal friends. So in principle, I'm also all about co-production, but I want to warn you that co-production is a double-edged sword, because nobody co-produce as efficiently as lobbyists. So if you enter into the game of co-production, you will immediately see that you will have around the table very clever, very intelligent, very prepared people, ready to take the agenda in that direction. But this is another story. Mario, you have off.
You're muted.
Mario, you are muted. Yeah.
Sorry. I have another question for Erik, one other for Andrea, one other for Erik. So just first go to Erik. Does the vernacular just save Western economy after crisis, or does it generally serve to constantly keep these economies alive? I'm referring, for example, to what can be inferred from the thesis of the original accumulation of capital by Rosa Luxemburg, and to how capital constantly relies on the appropriation of freely available natural and human resources. Needless to say, that still is the diabolicus Nicola asking this question. Is okay, Erik? You want me to repeat?
Yeah, well, could you repeat the first half?
Does the vernacular just save Western economies after crisis, or does it generally serve to constantly keep these economies alive?
Okay, well, you could say that the vernacular, in a sense, if you define them just as outsider, they could be the Marxists who could be the vernaculars. So, but my view on this is that I'm trying to I'm attempting to combine Marx and Schumpeter. There's an article about, well, was Schumpeter Marxist? And it, to some extent he was. And the happy marriage of happened in Japan after World War II, where the intellectual Marxists and the Schumpeterian businessmen actually got together and got the country really off the ground. So without going into the details of Rosa Luxemburg, I think it's I think there is a common there's a common thread in German language economics about focusing on production and keeping and keeping capital passive. If you go back and read Martin Luther, he actually was also very worried about capital taking over so much. So I think I don't want to go into discussion of Rosa Luxemburg, but I think that the conflict between capital and production is there, and that that Marx and the Marxists had a point about that all the time. You know, that I would agree to, but I wouldn't like to go into the details on the matter. You're muted again, I think.
Yes, I'm older. Okay, you speak of algorithms as if they were some form of self-organized autonomous entities that rule over people, but algorithms are made by people. So I do not understand your point. Either someone or some group is behind all these algorithms and intentionally leading us all into slavery, or is that algorithms have acquired a life on their own? This is Rogerio Chumbi.
Thank you for this question. No, not at all. Not at all. No. Clearly, this kind of vitalistic assumption of technology reproducing themselves are just created to absolve people from their responsibility. So I would say, if you are a conservative, if you are a lobbyist, you favor this kind of narrative. No, algorithms have a life of their own. No, this is not really what I said. I said that once the algorithms are developed by people using a vast array of tools and of data and of knowledge, and embedding in the same algorithm all their prejudice. Okay, what I'm saying is that once these objects have been built and put into society, they create a world of their own. So it's like a process of transfer. So all my, if you wish, to make it in a very simple word, if you wish, all my prejudice of my developer, of me as a developer or as a collective of developers, become an algorithm, and these algorithms occupy a space on the world, and by occupying this space on the world, the algorithm creates its own legitimacy. No, if you can understand, you can say it creates its own world, but not the algorithm developed by itself, not at all. In fact, people like Cartesian and Ricardian, what do? They, open the box, they reverse engineering the algorithm to look inside. No, they didn't. Okay, you have maybe in mind some kind of deep learning algorithm who make up an inference without knowing what, but this is nothing to do with algorithm being developed by themselves.
Andrea, if I can make a comment, so I shouldn't, but I cannot resist. I would say that what can happen is that an algorithm became a sort of virus, in the sense it's not alive, but still, since it is part of a process reproducing something bigger than him, and him at the same time, and it at the same time, it can evolve and affect what happened. Even though it's being created, let's imagine someone would have do a pesky virus release, no reference to what is happening now, but later on these things can keep evolving, even though it's not doing on his own, simply because it's part of a system that is making itself. So I would say that what you say is perfectly compatible, even assuming that this is made by someone. Still is not in take a life on his own, but as a virus is participating of a process of evolution. Okay, sorry.
It creates a world. But by the way, we don't even know whether the COVID was created on his own or was man-made. So
I want to
clearly apply. Yeah?
On this. A question to Erik. This is very specific. What do you think about the European Mercosur trade agreements? More of the Ricardian dream again?
Well, I would say yes, but building on that, history shows that what UNCTAD used to call symmetrical trade is always good. If you trade with another country at the same technological level, if Germany produces red cars and France produces green cars and they swap, that's good. So, but then you can have flying geese, so that some countries upgrade, right, like in Asia. But I would be afraid that Latin America and the EU would be something closer to what happened to Mexico with NAFTA, right? That and this is something that economists don't really want to see, that there are economic activities at extremely different technological levels. So what happened in Mexico was that the old-fashioned industries, the steel factories, which Mexico had built up over a long time, they slowly died, and instead you had the maquilas on the border, the assembly factories on the border. And the maquilas were filled up with the economic activities that US industry couldn't mechanize. So there were technological dead ends, right? So you can actually see sometimes when there's new technology, well, this has been farmed out to Mexico or to Central America, and then there's a new technological development in the US and they take it back again, right? So the poor tend to be specialized in technological dead ends. And you know, my old example is baseballs in Haiti. You know, the most efficient baseball producers in the world for the American sports industry they're made in Haiti, and these guys used to make 50 cents an hour because it couldn't be mechanized in the US, so give it to the poor, right? And I think this is an extremely underrated force in the global economy. So I'm afraid it would end up in that idea. And one more sentence on Latin America. I think Latin America had a good policy for a long time. Latin American Free Trade Association, LAFTA, ALALC, but then they opened up too fast under the neoliberal period, a little bit like Russia, but they opened up too early, right? So they got a similar effect to the one I showed in Russia, and that, you know, Brazil is a bit out of sync in this, but the other Latin American countries tend to be fairly similar. So I wouldn't say that is a good. That's probably not a good idea.
Okay, thanks. Now a question from Roberta Siciliano. This is another pretty good expert of statistics for Andrea. What's your opinion about the use and misuse of machine learning? Is it more dangerous and disruptive than good statistics? And then there is a second installment of the same question later on. Quantification and application learning machine, you need to use logic of statistics. Something went wrong in the writing of the question.
Yeah, the second part is what I was just trying to say in the course of my talk. You don't have machine learning appended up in a vacuum by its own, but is grounded on a lot of work of statistical thinking and preparation of the data, curating of the data. So that's why I say that there's a lot of commonality between different families. The question from Robert is more tricky. Who can kill? It's like a leopard, you know, who kills more, the fashion or death? Is death more deadly than fashion, or fashion more deadly than death? It's a difficult question. I know that in a sense, machine learning captures the imagination of people, because when you say that machine learning can mistake an ape for a black person, you really understand that this is a serious problem which impacts on a lot of values, gender issue, race issue, and so on and so forth. But I don't know, probably, well, and then machine learning goes with cognitive psychology. Then if you put machine learning with cognitive psychology, as many people have discussed, you have a terrible weapon of manipulation in the hands of those who want to influence the thinking of people, even the narrative, the main narrative, the socio-technical imaginary, the voting, and what's not. But on the other hand, we have had decades of systematic misuse of statistical methods, of which the statisticians were perfectly aware. I can dig up for you a lot of papers where every so often, and one statistician says, "Hey guys, nobody's using the p-test the way it should be used. It's a disaster. That's not correct." And that's why this led 2 years ago to a movement of some 500 statisticians signing a petition. You imagine a petition to abolish the significance testing. And now there is a statistical war, these people are fighting, but at least they are discussing. So Roberta, I don't know. I think is a good question.
A good answer. Okay, so again, you are, okay, now another from Rainer, then another for you. Would it be fair to say that, Erik, this is for you. Would it be fair to say that the larger economic entities always impose their rules on the rest of the world? First Spain, then the Dutch, then the British, followed now by the US. And now China? The Ricardian dream seemed like just a formal confirmation of this factual state of things in the global economy. This is Joost van de Velde that ask you.
Yes, I think unfortunately that is true, and I think if you go back in Japanese and Chinese history, you will find that when the United States was protecting their own industry, you know, they sent out a fleet to Japan and said, well, if you don't, I'll come back in a year, and if you don't sign a free trade treaty, we'll bomb the city, right? So and this is what's in Asia is referred to as the unequal treaties, and they were forced upon these countries. So Japan had to sign that they couldn't have a tariff for 15 years. And I'm working with somebody who spends considerable time in China, and they say that the Chinese understand this. There was this, exactly the same thing in China, that the Chinese were forced to sign treaties, the so-called unfair treaties that they still remember, and the Europeans even took over the administration of the customs office in China. So it was unfortunately that use of power has been there for a long time, and I think when we get some distance to what's happened during the Cold War, we'll find that the IMF and the World Bank have been doing that kind of nasty job under the hidden as scientific by David Ricardo. So yes, and I think unfortunately that's true, and we may see it again with China. Why should they be so much better than the Europeans when it comes to this? Why should they be kinder than we have been? That's unfortunately a sad question.
Yeah. Okay, so one question for Andrea from Ahmed Ali Moradian. I believe I know the guy is from Iran. How can we define the numerical algorithm in the mathematical modeling, especially in an energy system? We need to consider the definitions as the qualitative factors. So how can we do the quantification of these qualitative factors? How it is possible to quantify the language?
There is one of my friends, Andy Sterling, always says that we are often confronted with a stupid dichotomy, qualitative, quantitative. This is totally ludicrous. It doesn't exist. Quantitative is embedded into the qualitative. So you have a qualitative, which if you want in the universe, and in universes, you have an island, which is called the quantitative. Now, the question you are asking is, should we stay on this island or should we not? Well, most of my professional life I spent developing strategies to take this decision, because there might be a point in which you have to leave this island. Why? I make you a very simple example. You start doing your energy modeling to answer one precise question, for instance, about two competing technologies, but then you see that the uncertainty on the answers is so wide to go all the way from favoring A to all the way from favoring B. Now, a quantitative tool, which you, upon investigation, discover being unable to answer the question, but only to express a very high degree of uncertainty, is not useful. So you leave the island. You leave the island and you abandon being quantitative and you move into qualitative. But not always. In some cases, you see that even if you carefully propagate all the uncertainty and you are generous in the inclusion of alternative hypotheses and views and definition of what the progress in this field should be, then you get some kind of robust conclusion, robust in the sense not only mathematically, but also robust socially, because, you know, it is well for different communities, so to speak. So, okay, I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Now a question from Lorenzo Benini for Erik. Where do we go from here? What is the ethics of, no, sorry, I'm reading aging, guys. Following up on trade governance, the European Union is now working on the implementation of carbon border adjustment for imports, possibly in order to protect manufacturing in the European Union, steel, automotive, but also final product like information and communication technology, blaming others for high greenhouse gas emission. Somewhat this mirror ambition for a reindustrialization of Europe, focusing on high-end processes. Is this a desirable shift, caveats from a non-Ricardian perspective?
Well, it's interesting if you look at the history of the European Union. It started out as the European Coal and Steel Union. It started out as a cartel trying to balance the overproduction of steel after World War II. So in a sense, we're back to where we started. But I look at different stages of the European Union. I'm a fan of European Union up until Maastricht, and then I think what destroyed a lot was the euro, right? You know, there was a trial there with the unification of East and West Germany. The exchange rate between East German marks and West German marks was 1 to 8, and then when it changed a bit, and then when they integrated, the wages were integrated at an exchange rate 1 to 1. 1 East German mark is 1 Western German mark, and that, to a large extent, deindustrialized East Germany. You know, they couldn't live with that high labor cost because the technology was not that sophisticated. And when I'm nasty, I'm saying that introducing the euro, that was a test for the euro. So when Kohl came back from Brussels, he said, well, we have to do the poor countries in Europe a favor. We have to give them the euro as well. And that had exactly the same effect, that it deindustrialized. In the countries that were used to high inflation and high interest rates, they loved the euro because they brought the interest rate down. But wages kept going up, and they became completely they became not competitive. So I think the basic European dilemma is that German industry wins, Greek industry dies out. There was industry there. And there is a trade-off. You know, the Germans get their industry to win, but they lose their important customers in the periphery in the long term. And the cost is migration. You know, Greeks who don't want to leave Greece have to go to Germany because there is no job in Greece. So I think if Europe could face that dilemma of freezing the exchange rate at a long time and forcing migration in the favor of German industry, I think this is a problem. And I would say, yes, it's possible to have protection based on greenness, on levels of greenness. That's a possibility, but I think that should not be addressed without addressing the fundamental problem of the deindustrialization of the periphery. You know, from Greece and Italy is also being deindustrialized, and Portugal has lost almost most industry, right? So I think if we see this problem in the deeply disturbing context we already have, made worse by the by the new countries in the East, I think that's something to think about. That we you know, the suggested policy is something we could use, but we have to see it in this setting and not continue to help those few countries in the center that has won a lot from the euro, from being in the EU.
We passed the time, but we still have a few questions. So maybe I can give you a few additional questions. You can try to go through as quick as you can. Then, moreover, those that want to leave, they can leave. I mean, we cannot force them to stay. Okay, I have a question from Team Crownshaw. Probably, I think this is for Andrea. What is the proper role for quantitative analysis cognizant of the hazard of the Cartesian dream? System modeling, for example, can be applied to top-down control prediction, spurious metrics, or can be used to explore potentiality for system evolution and trade-offs that can be better inform our choice. Is avoiding all modeling throwing the baby out with the bathwater? I mean, this is a invitation for quantitative storytelling, I believe, no? Whoa.
Yes. Okay. No, of course. No, you remember, maybe I didn't have the time to express this when I was talking about the lesson of the French stat activist and of Pierre Bourdieu. You never leave the numbers. You never abandon these tools. Especially because you cannot win any war without those numbers and those methods. So you have precisely to use the methods to show how a certain kind of method is fallacious. Okay, so you really need to go into the method and use methods to show that something is wrong or which could be done better. You have to go into the number to show the number is a silly number or is not. So at no point I would suggest doing without a mathematical modeling, even less going out of statistical modeling and stopping developing algorithm. I'm saying that we have to do this depend on what the objective is. Okay, so we should think carefully about where we stand when we define our objective in doing this.
Okay, this is a long one. I believe this is for Erik. This is Luca Bozzo from Italy. In the original form of feudalism, collateral was limited to the amount of land available. Land-owning nobles could finance their lifestyle by mortgaging their asset to finance their living standards. Nowadays, the wealthy owners of tangible and intangible assets can raise financing, and in most cases, close to zero interest rate to the financial repression by central banks. So owners of collateral can receive almost free financing and use this money to buy more assets, which raises the price of assets and allow them to borrow even more. This is why the rest of living off wage struggles to pay the bills, with real wages dropping in the developed world, and the gap between the top 0.1 and the rest keep growing. In this new feudalism being institutionalized by a cooperation between the political, financial, and mainstream academics, can we say that this is a new feudalism being institutionalized by a cooperation between the political, financial, and mainstream academic system? What is the way out? Is there one without a wholesale restructuring of our economic system? Wow, this is a tough question, Erik.
Well, I think the short answer is yes, and I think I first used the term post-industrial feudalism in a paper published in Russia in 2010, and I think that's where we are. This is post-industrial feudalism, and I think like democracy was created in Europe by slowly having the feudal lords lose their power. It wasn't done overnight. I think in East Germany there was feudalism until between the two world wars. I think we have to attack this feudalism in the very same way. And the story reminds me of I had a job. Well, I'll be short then because we're short of time. But there are people out there who see this, that actually the policy has been the way out of the crisis has been to print people for those who don't need it, and not print money for those who need cash, and it's made the things worse. And we don't have to remember, we don't have to tell who that this was a policy of the European Central Bank also, of course.
Oops. One comment from Jos van der Velde. They say, having outsourced almost all heavy industry, the European Union is in a very weak position to blame other parts of the world for greenhouse emission. Yeah, I think that we can only agree on that. Then the last question from Francesco Spanò to the two of you. So where do we go from here? What is the ethics of quantification? How is it applicable to the social context? How are we to set it up in community as to change the balance of governance? How is the quantification of information supporting the present economic system? Ricardo and Cartesian are in fact together in today's world. The current system has its leverage point in a different governance at leverage points. Sorry, this is not particular. The last sentence is not clear. But however, this basically this is, so what do we do? The question is, what do we do though?
My recipe for this, well, you know that I think that we should really go into more into this direction of ethical quantification, but not in a theoretical way, in a much more problem-oriented way, in a practical way. To make an example, we know that a lot of new public management theory is based on indicators, on measurement, on this kind of cybernetic ideal of performance of which Alain Soupiot was talking. So what we can do is to work on these measures, on these indicators, try to deconstruct them and to show how wasteful they are. The same we can say to a lot of kind of mathematical modeling done, for instance, by FAO or by other international organization, which is based on faulty assumption and hence is dangerous for sustainability. We can show that using this again, this kind of ethics of quantification concept approach, that the use of metrics of higher education, the famous university ranking, are terrible, devastating in their consequences on the quality of higher education. We have seen the consequences during the epidemic of COVID. So let's say that my own answer would be to that, to be more active in creating this kind of sensibility, but also instrument like a laboratory or an observatory for doing this kind of work in a more systematic way in a large community of people, of like-minded people.
Well, in my view, we have to, the solution is to start using different languages. And I've been working with the Sami reindeer herders in northern Norway, and they have 325 different words for snow, right? If you go to Swahili, they have one word for snow. And what I'm thinking seriously is that economics, economics is like describing the economy in Swahili instead of in Sami. I mean, we have limited our vocabulary, our ability to see nuances, and our ability to qualitative understanding, the kind of qualitative understanding you have of persons and not of objects. I think we have to broaden our language in order to understand. We have to stop dealing in Swahili. We have to adopt a language which has more nuances, like the Sami with the 325. I think that is the basic thing. And I think in German philosophy, I think there is a lot of the word verstehen, the word understanding, has more discussion around it than it has in other languages. And I think if we, like you mentioned, Wolfgang Drexler, he's been working on this, and I think this is something we should be aware of. And clearly, you know, new public management is the ugly twin of Ricardian economics. That's clearly, and the alternative to that is the Weberian bureaucrat. The Weberian bureaucrat is the bureaucrat who has a lot of experience and judges from that experience. And he classically had 2 ink pods on his table, 1 ink pod for government business and 1 ink pod for private letters. You know, that was the Weberian bureaucrat. So I think we have some ideals here that we need people with experience.
Okay, so thank you very much. I want to thank our 2 panelists. I want to thank the people that make this possible beyond scene, that is Andrea Reinert, the defender against the dark arts, and also Sandra Buchens, that's been organizing all the preparation of this webinar. I have to thank all the people still surviving through this long webinar, and to the next one then. Bye.
Okay, thank you. Goodbye.
Last thing, this will be a video of this webinar will be available, I think, tomorrow, because I think that Ting Chu asked about the possibility of having the record of this presentation, and your webinar will be available tomorrow on the website.
So we put it on Twitter.
Yeah, you can. Okay, bye.
Bye.